All right, good evening, everybody. The like spotlights. Want to welcome everybody. We appreciate everybody and your interest in our Holy Lands trip. Um, I don't think any of us knew what to expect, but I think our trip ended up being way better than our expectations. We learned so much, we saw so much. We've got just a few pictures of the beginning of our trip. We had a great group of people, some we did not know. I personally did not know very well. But after the trip, I'm thankful that I'm able to call them my friends. So this is right outside the church on our way to the bus. Getting on the bus to go to the airport. Thankfully, Russell Flick, I don't think he's here tonight. He was able to drive us to the airport and pick us up. So that was a big blessing to all of us. This is landing in Tel Aviv. So we flew from St. Louis to Chicago, and then we went from Chicago directly to Tel Aviv. So it was about an 11-hour flight. And this is landing in Tel Aviv. This is going into the airport, from our gate into the customs immigration area. We were thankful that the tour company that we went with, they had someone meet us inside the airport that basically took us through the airport. So we didn't have to try to figure that out on our own. So we were very thankful for that. This is outside the airport, and it's the traffic controller. Thank you. Air traffic controller, which was, very interesting. It's very different than what we saw here. From here, our tour bus guide, or our tour guide, and our bus driver picked us up and took us to Tiberias, where we spent the first couple of nights in our trip. So we're going to tag team this. Different people can come up and go over different days of what we covered, what we saw, what we did in our trip, and we are going to have a question and answer session at the end. So if anybody has any questions, we'll hopefully be able to answer those. So with that, Lisa Carter is up for the first day.
Hello. Yeah, good luck. So like Jonna said, we spent our first 3 nights in the Sea of Galilee area, and it was beautiful and lush. You always think of the Holy Land of rocky and red and deserty, but where we stayed the first 3 nights was beautiful, lush. Um, so the first day, we hit the ground running and headed to the Mount of Beatitudes. And this picture here is the picture of the church that's represents the place where the Sermon on the Mount would have happened. But and this is an inside picture here. The way Tim kind of we didn't get, I don't know if we got a proper picture of it, but how it would have worked was you always think of Jesus standing on top of the mountain preaching to all these people, but it was really more like Jesus was at the foot of the Sea of Galilee looking up, and the people were on the mountain looking down on Jesus as, yeah, like an amphitheater type. And so, and that's in the Bible in Matthew 5:1-12, the Sermon on the Mount. And this is the area that it was taking place, and it was just awesome to stand on that ground where you knew Jesus stood and talked to the people and presented that sermon. And I believe this is, we've moved over to, I don't know how to pronounce it, Tabka? Tabka. This is outside of the church, and this was where let's see, loaves and fishes, the loaves and fishes. That is that the where Jesus fed the multitudes. And so this is the area where Jesus, is that where he took the 2 fish and 5 loaves and turned it into, yeah. So this is the area where that happened, and this is inside the church, I believe, of that area. There's always like, they build a little church over everything they consider holy ground, and there's like where the people are standing, there's a little piece of bedrock that you can, every church you went into, there was a little piece of bedrock you could see, and that's kind of the place where they were like, this is where it happened, or very close to it anyways. This picture is depicting, it's statue depicting where Jesus reinstated Peter after he had denied him 3 times. And so this is right at, this is our group picture at Capernaum, the town of Jesus. And I kind of Googled Capernaum because my coworker said, is Capernaum still a living city, a city? And it's actually just a tourist area now, but there is another town named something else in that area. But Capernaum, the ruins of Capernaum is really just a tourist area where, and they called that, in the Bible it says Jesus left Nazareth and lived in the area of Capernaum. Well, he really didn't have a home, but this was kind of his home base, you could say, that he kind of worked out of. This is kind of an odd picture if you don't understand what you're looking at, but there's the rocky part is the foundation of what they believe was Peter's home, Simon Peter's home. And you can see the gray beam there. That is actually a church built on top of it. And that's what this is it from far away. You can actually go inside that church and there's like a glass bottom. You can look down in it and see the ruins of what was they thought to believe as Peter's home. And this is the ruins of a synagogue in Capernaum, where Jesus would have taught in the synagogue. I'm sure he went there many times in the synagogue. And this is also ruins of Capernaum, probably the homes that people lived in Capernaum. It was just so cool. This is a beautiful photo of the Sea of Galilee. We also got to take a boat ride on the Sea of Galilee. Just like that, we got to get out on the Sea of Galilee. And the interesting thing about the Sea of Galilee, we stayed there 3 nights, and it's such a beautiful sea. It's actually a lake, but they call it a sea. Sometimes that water would just be like glass, just smooth as glass. And then 10 minutes later, it might just be really rough. And they said that's very common, and you hear about in the Bible stories of where they were out on the Sea of Galilee fishing, and then all of a sudden a storm blows up, and they said it just happens like that. The wind comes down over the mountain, so you know you're in a storm. I don't know what I did. I didn't move far. This is the last part of our day one, and we went to the Jordan River, and that's a beautiful shot of the Jordan River, which would have been where, this is probably not the area where Jesus was baptized, because he was baptized in the wilderness, but they actually have a little baptism site, and some of us did rededicate our lives and were baptized in the Jordan River. It was a cool experience. Beautiful. And I think that kind of wraps up day one. So I think, Tim, you
Okay, the first one you're going to see here, this is sunrise on the Sea of Galilee. That's what we woke up to, and you walk out, and that's what we saw each morning. And it was just that clear, just that beautiful. It's correct what Lisa was saying. I remember in a class I took on the life of Christ, a professor had been there many times, and he said, it's just the winds would blow over the top of the mountains that are surrounding the area there, and those winds would come pick up the cool air at the top, but they would blow down onto the Sea of Galilee, which is below the sea level. And so when it did that, it's a very temperate zone down in there. So you get, like we see on the weather, you get a cold front and a warm front meet together, you're going to get bad weather. And when we were actually on our boat ride on the Sea of Galilee, it did cloud up, and all of a sudden, rain came up. Now, we didn't see any big waves or anything like that, but it was raining really, really hard coming down. And we could look out across there, and I made a comment to a couple of people. I said, I think he's out there walking around someplace. We just can't quite see him, but it makes you feel like you're just right there in the footsteps of Jesus when you're seeing these kind of things. So on day two, we made a trip over to Caesarea Maritima. This was over by right on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, and I should say it like our guide would say it, Caesarea. He'd say it that way, like Caesar, and it's Caesarea. But he was always telling us to carry. We always carried these little things that were little earpieces. The battery was right around your neck like this, and you put this earpiece in. So he would. So we would walk along. You could be, from here to the lobby area, and you could hear him talking, on this thing like that. Never called whispers. So he had a way of saying, okay, we're going to get off now, and you need to take your whispers with you. With you is what we got used to hearing all the time. But this is Caesarea Maritima. That what you're looking at there is an aqueduct system, and it's miles and miles long. But it would literally haul the water wherever they wanted. They had ways to get the water wherever they wanted. The Romans were just brilliant on how they did all this stuff. But that's the beginning of the aqueduct system where we saw it. And there's a couple people standing in front of it, and then that's the sea, Mediterranean Sea that was in the background. Now it's in the picture right there. Then we walked over, there's a theater that's right there. This is where, if you're reading in the book of Acts about the death of Herod, God struck him dead and he got eaten with worms. If you read about that in the book of Acts, it's on the stage of this very theater is where that happened, right in front of God and everybody, so to speak. And so you're thinking about biblical passages like that, and you're thinking, my goodness, this is somewhere along in this area here where he got struck dead. God just said, that's it, you're done. And so, it kind of gives you a strange feeling to know that this is exactly where this thing took place. That's just a group shot of us. We were there to give you an idea of how high the stadium went up. But they said they could seat about 5,000 people in there. And so it was about just a gathering place where they did plays and all kinds of things there. But also, Herod would speak to them there, and he ruled in Caesarea Maritima. So that was that. And then this is the ruins that lead to his palace. If you can imagine something being built on top of these pillars and just a big palatial deal, it was pretty phenomenal just to see it. That only takes in part of the picture of what it was. It was a huge palace and it was right on the Mediterranean Sea. Next picture, though, this is that little area, right towards the top third. You see a body of water like inside some stone and a quarry that they have around that area. That's not seawater that's there. The aqueduct system would bring water, fresh water there. That's a pool that Herod had built there. He spared no expense on anything. So he had this pool that was put in there like that, and people could lounge around out there, and if they wanted to, they could go out to the Sea of Galilee or the Mediterranean Sea, and it was all right there for you. So that was kind of cool to see. And then this area here, when we came away from the palace, and you would walk through an area that would lead down to this particular area. This is where they would have chariot races, and you could see the chariot races go up around and come back. You just see how they kind of did it. What we didn't show you a picture of is our guide actually was sitting when we were walking towards this area. Our guide was actually sitting on something, on this walkway that led down to this area here. And we stopped and looked, and he says, yes, this is a toilet I'm sitting on. And that's what it was. They were public, but they all wore robes and everything, so they go to the bathroom right there, and they just go on about their business, go on in and watch the chariot races. And I just said, oh my goodness, I can't believe how they live like. But they thought no big deal about it at all. There were other descriptive things he talked about, what I'm not going to share with you right now, but it was just interesting how they lived. And this was all in just this place called Caesarea Maritima. Pardon? Yeah, we had public toilets, because I checked him to make sure. I said, "You okay? Or you're not doing anything right now?" But yeah, they didn't have that. They had. Well, no, what they did was they had buckets down below that area, and you could go down there, common buckets, and they would use that. I don't know how many people would use it, but it was just strange the way they did it all, and wondered why they had some disease in those days, I guess. But well, from this place we went up to Mount Carmel. Many of you might remember in the Bible, in the book of Kings, you remember Elijah the prophet took on the prophets of Baal, 400 of them. This is where they believe that took place, is up the top of this mountain, and that is a shot of a big statue. It's a big statue, and he's holding like a big sword in his hand, because you remember after he defeated the prophets of Baal, he chased them down the mountain and killed them all. All right, so this is where this area right here is where it was. And that's a church, like Lisa said. They usually build churches or some kind of monastery or something over the top of where they believe this stuff took place. This is the inside of that church. If you walked up to the front where that altar area is up there, they're saying, okay, we believe this could have been like the altar area that they actually had this contest between the prophets of Baal and Elijah. You know, they don't know exactly, but we knew we were in the area, general area. But the people who build these churches are, well, we're going to designate a spot. There's a big sized rock right here, so we're going to say this is where it happened. So that's kind of what they did. And so you walk in, you take a look at that. Now, when you walk out, and you take a look down over the valley there. You see just lots of different things. You can't really see it in this picture, but in the lower third, you'll see it's kind of like a white thing. It comes away from that highway, and it's going on the crooked way, and it comes out straight to the right. That is really where there's a brook that's there, and that's where Elijah went when he was fed by the ravens. It came to him and took care of him when he was up in that region there like that. They believe that's the general area where he was in a cave in that area, and that's where he was fed by God through the ravens. So, just a lot of history. And it just goes down, this mountainside goes into that area like that, and it just goes on forever, though. Big plain that's in that area there. So that was all that we saw there at Mount Carmel. Now, the next thing, we were on the road, and we took a picture of this from the road. He told us it was coming. He says, you will see a cave that was also a tomb, and there's a big round stone in front of it. This was very common. There's caves all over the place over there, but they would bury people in these caves and then roll those stones like that right in front of the cave entrance like that. So it kind of gives you an idea of what it was like at Gethsemane. We'll get to a shot of that in a little bit later on. I mean, the garden tomb. We'll get to that in a little bit later on. But this was just riding down the road. He said, you might want to get a shot of this because this is pretty common, what would have been around those days, how they buried people. Just roll it in front of the stone in front of the opening, and everything's sealed. So that was what we were seeing on our way to Megiddo. Now, Megiddo was a fortress that the Romans had, and it overlooks the plains of Megiddo, where we talk about the final battles in the book of Revelation says is going to be taking place at Armageddon. Well, that's at the plains of Megiddo. There's this fortress that sits up over that. And it's pretty imposing. If you're trying to take it, it would be pretty imposing. But the Romans had this, and we just took a few shots that were there of the ruins. And you can imagine walls and things like that. Some of these were storage areas where they had grain and things like that stored. They had their own water system there. It was a cistern that they built. Now, before we get to that one, there's this feeding trough that was this. Feeding troughs were very common all over the place, but we took this picture because they said this could have been very similar to what Jesus was laid in when he was born. Okay, something like that. That's your ancient baby bed. So that's but they also fed the animals out of that. Now, what you're seeing is here, this is the way they dug in their water system. They had to go down under the ground, and they dug it all out. That was just solid stone. We don't have a picture of it right now, but as you're going down these steps, and to me, that was a harrowing experience. They were kind of steep going down like this, but as you're going down, I can kind of see it, but only because I know what I'm looking for up there. But in the ceiling, you'll see like scars on top of the ceiling like that. What that was just literally what's left from where they were digging their way through. And you can just see how they carved this hole leading down into the ground. What was it, something like 80 feet that they went down in the ground? And here's the thing that got me. Women used to go get the water for the men every day. They'd carry these pots down these steps, Now, those steps weren't there. Those are modern steps, but steps of stone that were going down like that. These women would carry those things down and go out the other side, And I'm going, they had to be some really strong women to be able to do that. Every day they did that to take their water needs. So that's the tunnel that they went down. This might give you an idea, too, another story of Hezekiah when he was surrounded by the Assyrians, surrounded Jerusalem. It wasn't in this area, but in Jerusalem, they laid siege and said, we're just going to starve them out. They can't get any water or anything. They didn't know that Hezekiah had one of these things dug out to a pool outside the city. And they were getting water brought in all the time, constantly through an aqueduct system. Okay, so these systems are very common throughout the Middle East. Just where they would dig to get the water, they find their source, and just build an aqueduct system and get it to the people. So that's what we saw at Megiddo. Now, this next shot here, we've actually made the trip to Nazareth, Jesus' hometown. You remember the story of Luke chapter 4, where Jesus went back to to the temple, to the synagogue there, and he read from Isaiah. And the passage he read talked about the coming of the Messiah. And when he rolled the scroll up, he said, "This day you have seen this fulfilled in your presence." And they got to looking and saying, "Aren't you just a son of a carpenter? And you're claiming to be the Messiah?" Some things were said, and they got really ticked off at him. And they pushed him out, what it says in Scripture, they pushed him out to a precipice where they were going to throw him off. This is where they believe that took place. They would have thrown him out over that edge or like that. But as you remember in the Scripture, they didn't throw him off there. It wasn't his time. And all the Scripture says is he walked through the crowd. Do you believe a miracle was taking place there? I mean, he was the target that they had. We're going to throw him off this precipice. Anybody lose sight of him? I don't think so. I think Jesus just walked through, and they were prevented from seeing him, and he just went on his business, because he had ministry to do. It's at the beginning of his ministry. So I didn't get too close to the edge there. You can go out here in the lobby area. You can see a picture that was taken of me sitting maybe 10 feet away from that. I didn't get out to the clear of the edge. I was sitting on a rock there like that. And I like the picture real well, but you're looking out over those plains again, where you see just the plains stretch forever and ever. You say, this is why they had great wars and battles in the Middle East, because these guys would come from a long way. Now, this mountain here that you're looking at is Mount Tabor. You're reading scripture about Mount Tabor, and some people believe that is where the Mountain of Transfiguration took place. Other people believe it was north to the Sea of Galilee, around Mount Hermon. But this is one site they believe could have been where Jesus had the Mountain of Transfiguration, where he took Peter, James, and John up, and he was transfigured before them with Moses and Elijah. Okay, so that's what that shot is right there. So that was in Nazareth. We didn't actually go into the town of Nazareth. Nazareth was kind of like supposed a wide spot in the road back in that day. It's a booming city now. There's just all kinds of places. It just kind of sprawl out all over this mountainside. But one of the things that I thought was interesting is, the wedding feast of Cana. Cana is right next door to Nazareth. I didn't have it put in this thing here, but I have a picture I took from up there where we were at Mount Precipice, and I looked down and I could see where Cana was. So Jesus went from Nazareth over to Cana. He performed his first miracle there, changing the water into wine. But we didn't go down and actually go through all that stuff because we just didn't have the time to do that. But got a couple pictures of things. So that was day 2, and went back and enjoyed our good meal that night. And the next day we got up, and Jennifer's going to tell you what we did on day number 3.
So day 3, oh, that's really loud. Day 3 was the day for me that it really hit me, that where we were, what we were seeing, and I'm still getting teary-eyed about it. This was the place, this was the day. So we visited first Beit Shan, something, to be frank, I don't remember ever hearing about. But as I looked it up a little bit more, this is the place where Saul and his sons were displayed on the wall after they were beheaded. Likely it was up on top of that hill in the back. This is a city that was active from 3000 or more BC up until 1300, 1500. There's a modern city to the side of it, but this historical place is there, and it was built many cities on top of each other. Started up on the hill, but first we'll talk about what's kind of down below. The place that hit me the most, this is a piece of the bathhouse, and we just walked into it. So I've heard all my life in school all these things about the Roman bathhouses and how you went and you took a bath, and I'm just like, really, you together? But this one was amazing. The tiles you see there, were laid down at 0 sometime, right? Or 1,000 years before that. So thinking that this is a place where people for thousands and thousands of years walked, I am walking on that tile and I can see it. It was amazing. I literally was shaking and teary-eyed, which I still am. So each room was different. It was a huge structure. So their common area where all the men, sorry, I'll say it, it's probably true, all the men went and talked politics. So this was a side room, I think, and I think Ashley, you have a different picture up there. And then this was where the floor, one of the floors. So all of those different pieces is where the floor would lay on top of it. The back around the sides, you'll see the really thin, like a completely different rock than what you saw on the other. That was it would hold heat. So think of an oven. So they would heat the water and it would heat the walls and it would flow in between those underneath that airspace underneath the floor. And this was your like sauna room. And they had multiple different rooms for different temperatures where you'd get hot. You warm up and then you cool down as you come out of it. And this was a marvelously um, kept, what they found, just like this, a sauna room. Just some pictures of the different structures. It was a huge, I'll call it huge city. You could tell definitely multiple different generations were there from the different structures, all built on top of each other. You'll see in a minute with Jerusalem what it looks like. That's what I've pictured it. And this is the original main road that goes through kind of what I call the promenade. I don't remember what term they used. What was it? Cardo? There was so much that it doesn't stick. But kind of if you look in between each of these different pillars, there were shops, individual shops on all of them. So that's why this was kind of their main road that they walked through, and that's the original road in the middle. They, still had rocks where you could see. It's hard to see in the picture on the screen, but inscribed with some of it was Egyptian, some of it was Greek. It was all in different languages because of the different time periods. But all those things still well preserved and were there. It was destroyed at one point from an earthquake. I think that was about 74 maybe. Lots of things happened in 74 AD. That's when Mount Vesuvius erupted too. So an earthquake through here, and you can see kind of where the pillars fell and how the city was destroyed at that point. We did have an opportunity then to go up on top. So this is a view of what Beit Shan, the city in that period, looked like. And up where we were is where originally King Saul and King David, Solomon and King David had their fortresses. So you can see a totally different type of structure that was built up on top of the hill. Which was just absolutely amazing to think how long ago that was, and we can still find the structures that they have. And what, like Tim said with Megiddo, it was up on top, and you could see for miles and miles and miles. So it was very much protected. A little bit of our crew, I don't remember the tree, but I know it's significant for something, so I wanted to include our people up on top overlooking the city. So after we left there, we drove into Jerusalem, and after being in Tiberias, almost felt a little quaint, a little small. Looking at Jerusalem, it was, wow, this is different. Completely amazing things as far as you can see. I don't think there's grass there at all, built ever. There are some few trees you see, but you can definitely tell there's suburbs, modern in the back, some tall, some small. One of the things that CJ, our guide, told us was there's not individual homes in Israel because you have to have, in order to build, you have to have a bomb shelter in the bottom. So pretty much everybody lives in apartment buildings of sorts. So that was just something different that you didn't see there. So we did get an opportunity that afternoon to go into the city. So this is, all the gates look the same to me. This is the Zion Gate, multiple gates throughout the different parts of the old city. So this is the wall that surrounded Jerusalem. And the streets is not like what you would see a city street. This is a city street in Old City Jerusalem. As they outgrew things, they would put the arches on top. And so here's our crew marching up down one of the roads. We then were able to kind of walk through the shops. So they have shopping districts as well. And they're like just little closets. And they just open up the doors and here's your shop. Selling all kinds of wares, some for tourists, some not for tourists. Spices, some smelled amazing. Then we were able, because Jerusalem, just like a lot of places there, city built on top of city on top of city. This is a mural that's built on one of the levels below, and I don't remember what period it was when they put the mural in there, but in the bottom right hand corner, if you can see a girl. So this is kind of, think that Cado that I talked about earlier, this is what it would have looked like. And you see a girl and a little boy. He kind of has a backpack on and a hat on backwards. So you have Old City Jerusalem, and she is handing off, it was a pomegranate, wasn't it? A pomegranate to a modern boy who went back. So it's how the old city, is connecting with the new city. So it was just a really interesting connection that the people in Jerusalem make to those that live there, from old to new. As we rounded out our day, we went to an upper room. Not sure it was the upper room, but did go to one. It was very beautiful. It was huge, much bigger than what I ever would have imagined. So this was a stained glass window that was in it, and then here is the rounded, multi-story upper room. In my mind, I was thinking a little quaint little room, but this is a place where Jesus went to have his quiet time with his disciples, and where they did the Passover and the last meal too. And after that, we moved to just outside to the house of Caiaphas. And it's a church, like they said earlier, a church built on where the house of Caiaphas was. And that was the church. And then this is some ruins that they've uncovered, and it's built right alongside the wall of the house of Caiaphas. And underneath the church, they have the pits where they would put the most extreme criminals in. The pit they put Jesus in, believe, but before he was crucified. So this is all of us down there. It was quite steep. There was no way you were going to climb out. It was pretty amazing. Like Tim said, on the well or the aquifer at Megiddo, this was the same thing. You could see all the different marks where they had hammered it out. Not big sledgehammers like we do today. They were small little pieces, and they did this, 12 feet below the earth to get out. It was a pretty somber experience to be down there. All right, and with that, we have a couple of things that I think Tim goes back to that will, some other experiences in the Old City.
Okay, the next picture that you're going to see, this is one of the outer walls. Those are bullet holes that are in that wall. This is from the 1967 war that was over there in Israel, and they were trying to lay siege to the old city, and they really tried to lay siege to it. But those are actually just bullet holes that are in the side of the wall. And the next picture is the view of the city of Jerusalem at night. And it's just, I don't know who took this picture, but it looks like to me it was taken from where our hotel was, that you could look out and see parts of the old city like that. So Jerusalem, it just sprawls out over these hills all over the place. Pretty magnificent. So then we come to day number 4. This is the Mount of Olives that we're standing on, looking back to the city. That is the Dome of the Rock Mosque. You see it in the lower left-hand corner, that big gold object there. That's the Dome of the Rock Mosque. That's where they believe the temples of Solomon was there. But when all the Islamic people came in and conquered, well, this became their national shrine. So it's an international shrine, really. And that's where they'll have other pictures here in just a little while. See the Dome of the Rock Mosque a little closer. But this is looking down the Mount of Olives. Now, what you're looking at in the foreground there, those are graves. They pay big dollars to be buried there because they believe that Jesus has not come yet. And so when he does show up, when the Messiah does come, literally they said they want a front row seat. Resurrection will take place. They want a front row seat. So those are all graves. Not too far from this location is another cemetery similar to that, and it's where Oscar Schindler from Schindler's List is buried. We saw some of where that was in that cemetery as well. Let me see, what are we looking at here? Okay, this is the Garden of Gethsemane. One of the things I'd like to say about the Garden of Gethsemane, you see these olive trees that are all around. It's not a very big area. I mean, it's not. It's just like just a small area, maybe a couple of these sections like this together and back to the wall. It's very small like that. So when you're walking through the Garden of Gethsemane, you're thinking, Jesus walked right through here. And this is not, well, we think it's somewhere in this big area here. No, it was in this smaller area like this. It's somewhere where he would have knelt and prayed, you know, the prayer, can we do this another way? But not my will, your will be done. It was in that area right there that he prayed that prayer. They built another church that's there. This is outside that church that you can look in and see the big stained glasses. They're very ornate, very decorative in the way they do all this stuff. We took a picture inside. There was actually a mass that was going on at that time. We don't have a shot of it. I've got it on my camera, but we don't have a shot on this one. Where he's talking from, down below, there's a little etching like, and it looks like a hen, and it is. It's a hen with some little chicks following behind. You think, what's the significance of that? They believe that's where Jesus was looking down on Jerusalem and said, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I would have gathered you like a mother hen would gather her chicks, but you would not listen." So they believe that was in that area there where he made that prayer for Jerusalem. So that was the mass that was going on there. And then this is a view of another one of the gates, Mercy Gate. You're looking in the upper third of the picture. That's what you're seeing there. It looks like it's all walled up, but those were big gates that were open back in the time of Christ. Then we moved on to Bethlehem. This is the Shepherd's Church. This is another church that they built. They believe this is where the shepherds were standing around, and you know, they got the vision, and they have this kind of a thing on the inside there. We see this is the vision that they got, and of maybe what it would look like for the birth of Christ. But the shepherds were out on this hill. Now, we didn't get to see, there's some stuff, there was construction going on around there and everything, but if you went to the edge of a parking lot nearby there are some hills that roll down, and I envision that's where the shepherds were standing, you know, when they got this, the angels came and visited them, you know, but they have this church built. I said, oh, it's right here. That's interesting how they always say, this is where we believe it happened. I'm going, okay, if you say so, but I think it kind of looks better out there, you know. But who am I to argue with them, you know? So that's inside the church. Now, here is the Church of the Nativity. This is the place where they really believe Jesus was born in Bethlehem. So it's not at the same location we were just at. You had to travel just a little distance away, and there's this bigger church there. And you go inside, and we didn't get all the pictures, but this is a big, long area, and at the end of it all, if you went down there, it's much deeper than what it looks like. Very ornate. I mean, it's just got globes hanging, different colors and jewels and everything all over the place. Very ornate. And we had to stand in line because we were trying to get to the place where they believe this is where Jesus was born, okay? Now, as you got up towards the front and went off to the side, there's this little doorway that leads down, and you have to duck your head to get in. I'll make a comment about that in my meditation for Sunday morning. I'll comment about, so remember that when I start talking about it Sunday morning, you have to duck your head to go down to the place where they believe he was born. Now, when you go down the steps, you'll come to a place that's actually a 14-point star that you see right there in the top third of the picture, and they believe this is the place where Jesus was born. The significance of the 14 points is the 14 generations, 3 times in the book of Matthew, that lead to the birth of Christ, from Abraham down to Christ. So it signified that way. But everybody went down there. We looked at it. You can kneel down. You could touch it if you wanted to. They said, this is where we believe that Jesus was born. We don't have a picture in this series right here, but about 6-7 feet just across the way from that is a place that's carved out. Looks like just a manger scene, and that's what they would have figured. There's a little trough like there, and it's all just what you would envision. Okay, he was born here, but he was put in his trough over here, and it's all kind of like in a cave type of thing that could have been adjacent to a house that was there. And because they kept the animals and everything just pretty much underneath the same roof, they just lived in a lower section. So it all kind of came alive to me as I've studied that stuff before. I could see all this taking place. Now, did it happen exactly right there? I don't know, but we're in the approximate area. That's the truth. So That was at the Church of the Nativity, and so I think that's all I have at that. The next day is day number 5. Terry's going to tell you about a place called Masada. It's got a lot of history to it, and he'll tell you a little bit about it.
A couple people, I think, mentioned wilderness. And so when we look at Masada, you have to really think, look at how arid it is, look at all the landforms and what have you, and look at, well, actually, yeah, we were looking up at Masada very high and kind of scary to think, well, how do we get up there? And believe it or not, there actually is a trail. So there were a number of individuals we could see from the tram that we all took going up there. Otherwise, I don't know how many of us would have really made it going up to the very top of Masada. But anyway, so from the top looking out, it's just, I mean, it just takes your breath away to see, you know, all that vastness. Again, the arid nature of that area. And then historically, I don't know how many of you know, but there were a group of Jewish zealots that had retreated, actually kind of to hide away up in that area. And you see, but even before that, was it Herod that had the palace?
Herod.
Herod had palaces in different locations and spared no money. So can you imagine the builders having to construct that palace in different levels? So you got those terraces where he would be able to go along with his servants or handmaidens, etc., to these various parts here. Part of the reason for that location was they could get breezes. So when it was really hot, they could be in those locations and they would get that nice breeze to cool them off. But what you need to realize in the later, when the Jewish zealots lived up there on the top, they had their structures. They had, you know, and these were ruins from where they actually lived for a period of time. And I don't know exactly how long that was, but I think in the end, there were about 900 of the Jewish zealots that lived on top. They had gotten a name for themselves. The Romans did not like them. And the Romans had tried to their very best capability to destroy those zealots because they didn't want them coming after them. And so they made the decision, and right down there at the bottom, you can see what's called a siege camp. See that rectangular shape down below? And those were all the way around Masada. And there were even stone walls built connecting those siege areas because they didn't want any of the zealots to possibly escape. So their escape, in essence, was cut off. So they, anyway, okay, so we saw the ruins, the siege fort. Then right here, you see pieces of pottery. And on each one of those pieces of pottery was a name. And it was the name of the leader of the various groups of the zealots that were living at the top of Masada. The sad note was the zealots did not want to get captured by the Romans. So they had to make a decision about what to do. And sadly, they decided that the head of those family units would take the lives of their own loved ones. And they did that. And so before the Romans, and you'll see more pictures here in a minute, of the ramp where the Romans came up to ultimately storm Masada, hoping to get the zealots. But that didn't happen. So the pottery pieces there with the names of the heads of the various families would draw. They put those pieces in a bowl or whatever. They would have to draw out one of those names, and they would be the person then to, the families had been sacrificed. They used, I think, a knife on their family members. And then ultimately they didn't want to stay alive either. So they would draw a name to say, well, who is going to, I don't know if it would be, who would be next? Yeah, who would next to be slain? and they would have literally one of their friends slay them. And that name probably was the person that was going to do that. And so they had to do that with each one of those pieces until finally there was only one individual left. And I think they finally either fell on their own sword at the end. So can you imagine that, destroying your own family, then taking the lives of the heads of those families? Then when the Romans, when this right here, this shot is of a cistern. Okay, that's a cistern where they would store water. And, okay, I think that's a cistern. Yeah, right, okay. And that's the siege ramp. And I can't imagine, I'm sure you can't either, what it took to build that. So what they had to do was bring load upon load of rock and dirt and whatever. And then they had to reinforce it so it didn't fall away. And they had strategies for doing that. The Romans were masters at building different things. So they built that siege ramp where they could literally push. You know what they call that? The big wooden structure? They had a big, like a catapult type thing. And within that catapult, be like the Trojan horse, you know, where they built their big whatever structure. And they pushed that up the ramp with, you know, manpower, pushing that up the ramp until they literally were able to get up at the top. And then finally storm over the walls to get into the top. And then they get up there and discover everybody's deceased, dead. So they weren't able to capture women, make them slaves or whatever. And then here we are, our group, and Travis, along with my grandson David, we all were able to get up there to the top, but it was very rough. So to try to get around to all the ruins and whatever wasn't possible for everybody. But nonetheless, right, Travis, that was quite a view up there on top. And you can just see looking down there what that would be like. Yeah. And so, yeah, so you can see all, you look at the stone, look at the caves, all of that area with limestone and whatever, you had
That
caves.
doesn't move that fast.
You had caves everywhere. No, it was, yeah. But the tram ride was beautiful. And we felt very secure in riding that car back down to where we started. So,
Yeah.
was it 3 minutes? I'm not sure. Yeah.
There goes one.
Okay. Yeah, so that's just a really wonderful view. But to think about people taking their own lives the way those Jewish people did would have been horrific. And now this is En-Gedi, right? So we're going to be talking about En-Gedi, another real desert wilderness area. And in the Bible, remember Saul pursuing David, and that, you know, being very jealous, he wanted to get rid of his competition. So this is an area then that we're told that David, and along with some of his soldiers, actually came to this very remote area. And down below, you see the caves up above, and that's supposedly where they actually hid. And they had a lookout. You could see everywhere to see anybody coming. So then they could disappear into the back of the caves or whatever, so somebody couldn't get them. But down below, when we looked down below here at the entrance, was just amazing. Phenomenal, like oasis type setting with fig trees, acacia trees, and just an unbelievable view. And the waterfall, it wasn't just one waterfall, right? There were like a succession of waterfalls. So up from the top, the summit area, and coming down like steps were these different waterfalls. And then one of the things that was so cool was a lady had a shofar.
Mm-hmm.
And so she stood in the water near that waterfall and blew the shofar with a lot of other people looking on. So that was pretty neat.
I have that on camera if anybody wants to see
Yeah,
that girl.
it is very, very nice.
It impressed me.
And then this particular tree, the crown of thorns tree, is what they believe. This is where they took a branch, the Roman soldiers, and actually formed a cross to put on Jesus' head before the crucifixion. And if you took a close look, the thorns were like about that long. So can you imagine having that pushed down on your head? So that was a very touching thing for us to see too. And now we have Qumran, and Qumran, all of you have probably heard of the Qumran Valley, right? And historically, remember, that's where 1947, and I can't forget that date because that's Gail's birth date. but
How old are you guys?
but these are some of the ruins at Qumran, and there's a lot of controversy about who actually lived there. But with Qumran, in those ruins, they believe it may have been the Essenes group, and there are a couple other names of groups that potentially lived there. And other theories, which as I've read it myself, I'm thinking, nah, I don't think so. They said some wealthy person from Jerusalem may have had an estate there, and I thought, nah, I don't believe that. But at any rate, those ruins there were amazing. One of the big features of the ruins was the aqueduct system. So before I talk about, right here, they were very skilled at utilizing when they had rainfall. Coming from the Wadi Qumran was like a during dry season, dry. That's what Wadi is. But during the rainy season, they would utilize an unbelievable miniature aqueduct system that they developed and designed. And because they built a lot of that with natural rock, they had to plaster a lot of it so the water wouldn't seep through the rocks. And they would direct the water into deep cisterns. And you saw another one of the pictures of a cistern where they would save just a massive amount of water. And then they were able to control the flow of the water from the cistern kind of on, a successive levels down to mikvahs. And at Qumran, they figured at least 10 mikvahs. And those mikvahs were where the Jewish individuals would take their ritual baths. And as I was reading, this is interesting, that they would take at least 3 ritual baths daily. And they said that in this area, they were at least around, in this particular, where the ruins were, about 200 individuals, males, mostly males. In reading, it said there were not that many females in that area, even though they found a few female burials around the outskirts of these ruins, predominantly men. Now, I'm going to share a fact, since we got a few other things about toileting. With this group of individuals that were there, and then they believe theory, they were the scribes that were responsible for the scrolls, the deep sea scrolls. Well, I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But with these, the mikvahs, can you imagine that many individuals in a dusty area where they would have probably gotten pretty dirty and dusty because they had jobs. They had different jobs there, going in bathing. Now, during the rainy season, it wouldn't have been so bad because they would have been able to have had more fresh water coming in and all that. But during the dry season, that was not the case. And one of the things I did read, I thought that'd be interesting to know, when they examined the skeletons of the deceased from this area, they found the bone had a lot of disease in it. And they said a lot of that was probably attributed to bacteria because the water would have become nasty. So just think about it. Bathing that many individuals 3 times a day and that water in those 10 mikvahs, not good. So they believe they got bacteria because they would do total submersion when they took their ritual baths. Okay, going to now, the cave that we're looking at there, I believe, is Cave 4, they called it. This is where 2 shepherds, young shepherd boys, were shepherding their sheep, and they will see where the ridge is up there above the cave. Well, on beyond to the right would be a much larger plateau area, where there would have been grazing, grass and whatever for the sheep. And the story is one of the sheep got away. They thought maybe it fell down because there's an opening up toward the top there. Maybe the sheep slipped down into the cave. So then one of the shepherd guys threw a rock to see if he could startle the sheep, and they could hear it and say, yeah, it's down there. Anyway, the long and short of it is they heard a sound. They heard this breaking of something, and it drew their curiosity. They went in and checked the cave out. Sure enough, they look in, and there they find these large jars, about this big, about that tall, about that big round. And they investigated the jars, found them with rolled up something. They didn't know exactly what they were. But one of the guys thought, oh, some of these are leather. These would be great for thongs for our sandals. So that was one of the things they thought about. We could use it that way because they did not know how valuable they were. But one of the shepherd guys said, well, I know a friend in Bethlehem that could check these out and just see what it is. So the long and short of it is they find out they're very valuable. The book of Isaiah, and they said over 1,000 scrolls were found in that area, not just in that cave, but in many others that they investigated. And that almost every book of the Old Testament was represented in those scrolls. I think Esther and one other was not represented there. So anyway, just very fascinating. And what?
You got to see him.
Yes, and we got to see the scrolls, went to the big Israeli museum where they showed all of that. So it was phenomenal. And I don't know who goes after me.
It's me.
Tim? Okay.
Okay. Next slide that you're going to see there, that's the Dead Sea. And no, that's not a beach whale laying in the foreground there. That is actually me floating around there in the Dead Sea. Somebody said, man, it looks like you were on a big inner tube. I said, no, that was my belly. I have to do something about that. But we were all just floating around out there like that. And they said, it's impossible to drown in that place. If somebody finds somebody dead there, it wasn't because they drowned there. It was because they were put there, because you just float. You just lay back there and float around. So there's people in there, they're reading newspapers, whatever, it's just whatever you want to do. This was in Jericho. We went to Jericho, and Travis got kissed by a camel. Okay, that was one of the things that happened was, he couldn't get on the camel, so the guy brought the camel to him and kissed him on that. So Travis got that experience. Now, Dave Tisher was just randomly picked. Sir, would you come forward? And he was going to ride the camel. They put one of those turban deals on him, the headdress thing. Lynn has pictures of that, but they put that on Dave. Now, the interesting thing is Dave was real concerned about going over there about people who wore turbans and towels, and, are we going to run into any people who are not going to be very nice or anything like that? And he kept talking about that. Isn't it interesting? He got picked to wear one of those things, so we rode him pretty hard about that for a while. But anyway, that's Travis getting his kiss from the camel. This is a model of what they believe Jericho looked like. And the ancient ruins are beyond all that, and they're still excavating that. So we could not go there to see what they've actually found, but I've seen a documentary or two about it, and you can see some of the excavation work that's going on. It's kind of hard to pick out what's there, but that's part of the wall system that they dug down to find that. Okay, so they said it looks like, a documentary I saw on it said, it looks like what the archaeologists have found is that something happened to where all the walls just collapsed like that, right on top of each other, all the way down like that, so they could see that happening. What does it say in the book of Joshua? They marched around the city, and when they all yelled, the walls of the city came tumbling down. We sang that song and everything. You could literally see how that could happen in the way that's all structured like it. So that was pretty neat to see Jericho like that. My wife would have been very happy in Jericho. That's Palestinian territory. It's not Israeli territory. She'd have been happy because they had big signs for Coca-Cola all over the place. They like our Coke over there. Big red and white signs all over. So anyway, the Mountain of Temptation is just behind. You see the peak that's just, right there to the left where it's got that tower on. They believe there's a cave right down there. You see about maybe halfway down on that mountain. There's a couple of caves that are right there. They believe this is the area, this whole area is the wilderness area that Jesus went into after his baptism and to be tempted by Satan. And they believe that this was probably the little mountain range or so, where he was taken by Satan to look over and say, look at all the kingdoms of the world. You can have them all if you bow down and worship me. You know what's interesting about that? I took that picture late in the afternoon, got back to the hotel, it was about 5:30. I said, I can catch the service. This was on a Sunday. I can catch the service. And Luke was preaching that day. And he was preaching on Satan. We were doing biographical sketches, you know, Satan, Abraham, David, Ruth, different ones like that. He was preaching on Satan that day and was using that illustration of the temple of temptation mountain where Jesus was. I said, Luke, I listened to the sermon. I said, Luke, I'm sending you a picture. You referred to that today. This is where they believe that took place, you know. So it was kind of cool that he was preaching on that very subject about where Jesus was tempted on that mountain. And I just happened to be there that afternoon. So that was pretty cool to have that kind of experience like that. There are caves all around that area there that Jesus could have been in. There's a monastery that you see in the upper right-hand corner. It's just embedded into the mountain there like that. But there's a big monastery that they built many, many centuries ago, and it's still there today. You can go to it. We didn't go up there to it, but you can go to it and take a look around. There were people walking up there. You could see them. They looked like little dots walking up, going up to the monastery. But anyway, that's the mountain view of the temptation area where Jesus was. So, let me see who's next on this. Perry is next. Okay.
Okay. Day 6, we had the Temple Mount, and it's 36 acres. We'll see a bigger picture here in a second, and it's on top of Mount Moriah, and it's one of the most highly contested pieces of real estate in the world. All three of the biggest main religions hold it as sacred or holy: Jews, Muslims, and Christians. And one of the reasons the Muslims do is because the first photo was the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and it's a mosque. You can't see the dome on it. It's got a gray dome on it, but it's the place where they believe that Muhammad was flown to this place on his winged horse, and then from somewhere on that mountaintop, he went to heaven or Allah or whatever. And it's their third holy place other than Mecca and Medina. And an interesting thing, when the Crusaders in 1050 or whatever, when they took over, they killed out all the Muslims and or drove them out. There was nobody to tell them that this was just a mosque. They thought this was the temple from, you know, the Jews' temple. And so they set up shop in there, and that's where supposedly that's where they got the name Knights Templar. I don't know if it's true, but that's one of the traditions. The next one is the Dome of the Rock. It's another Muslim shrine, and we can't go in because we weren't Muslim, and you can't even really go in anymore to take pictures, but they have pictures of it. There's a rock coming up out of the floor, just like kind of what we saw. They paved all the way up around it except for that. And that's one of the places where they think maybe Abraham offered up Isaac, somewhere on that mountain, maybe there. And the Jews think that that's the place of the temple, because when they used to let people go in and take pictures, there's actually a square cut out of the rock, chiseled out. They think that's where the Ark of the Covenant sat. Again, we don't know for sure. But Jewish tradition says that's where it's at. And then another tradition said it's more off to the side. This is looking over. I'm not sure what those columns are. What they're
Looking over towards the Mount of Olives.
Yeah, it's doing that, and there's a better view of it. There's the Mount of Olives, looking through that, and we kind of came up through an archway, and the first thing we saw was that Dome of the Rock, and okay, I know it's a religion that I don't believe in, but that still was an impressive sight. Seeing that big, huge building there, I thought it was pretty important, pretty cool. This is one of the Tim showed the Mercy Gate. This is the inside. They made like a little room out of it. You can't go through it because when the Jews were dispersed by the Romans, the Muslims moved in, made this their place, made it their home, Muslimized it, I guess you could say, by building all this stuff on it. And they boarded up, actually rocked up all the gates so that the Jews could not come up to the Temple Mount anymore, even though there wasn't any temple there. And the Jews think it's important because, again, Abraham and Isaac they think they were, that's where Abraham offered up Isaac. And also David bought the threshing floor in this area. And then that would be the site of Solomon's temple. And then it was tore down, and Zerubbabel's temple. And then Herod, there's only 2 temples, but there's 3 names. Herod did a fix it or flip it on the Zerubbabel's temple. He expanded it, made it bigger, did a big remodel on it. And when he expanded it, he actually broadened out the temple courts, and that created the Western Wall, which we'll see in a little bit, and the teaching steps. What's the next one there? Oh, okay. I thought we had a bigger view. Okay.
Okay. On the pools of Bethsaida, I know it doesn't look much like pools right there, but really, if you could stand back further a little bit, we could, took a wider lens of it. What you're going to find out is there are spots there that just gathering areas, just pools is what it was, and they had an aqueduct system that came in with the water. This is where they believe that the man was lame who was lame ever since forever. If he could just get somebody to get him to the water when the water was troubled, because they believed that then the angels had touched the water and there could be healing, and he could never get there. Jesus was passing through that area by the pool of Bethsaida and saw that man and walked over and healed that man at that place like that. So that's where one of the stories of Jesus took place. And this was a common area where Jesus would pass through Bethsaida. You read about it in Scripture, but these were the pools that were in that area. And then the next picture you're going to see, this is the Church of St. Anne. That's the outside of it. The inside of it's there. It's a shrine because they believe that's where Mary was born, and that's where her parents lived. Not in a facility like that. They've just built, again, a big church over the top. But they believe that was the area where they lived and where Mary was born. So this is very, very important to the Catholic tradition. The Virgin Mary, as they would always be saying that. So then we turned a corner and came down to an area called the Via Dolorosa. I think that's what a lot of people understand is the way of the cross, the way of suffering. That's where Jesus went when he took the cross, carried it through the streets of Jerusalem out to Golgotha, where he was crucified. This is a sign that indicated that. This is part of where you're walking, going to the Via Dolorosa. People would have been gathered on both sides of the street, probably watching him, because they always watch public executions. I don't know. It's just something they like to watch, I guess, but I hope they'd never be on one of those crosses. But they went down through these areas. Some of the area that you look at on the Via Dolorosa is like underground, because there's, as was said earlier, some of these cities are built just on top of another city, So we went down underneath to see what was underneath the Via Dolorosa, and there's lots of different things down underneath there that I don't know how much biblical significance it had, other than these are things from the times of Christ. That's how long these things have been around. So just a little bit of the Via Dolorosa. This was a mural that they had downstairs that was painted onto this wall of Jesus carrying the cross before we came up out of the, and that's where we're just coming up out of that down that area underneath, and then we came back up to the original Via Dolorosa. The next picture is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is one of 2 sites they believe was the place of the crucifixion. It's very ornate. Everything around it is just bejeweled and just gold and everything like that. I don't know. As I kept looking around, I'm trying to figure out where the place would have been that would match up with the skull, the place of the skull. I'm kind of trying to figure out where they would have crucified him. I never could come to my conclusion on that. Other pictures, I got some other pictures that I took from just different angles, and I still can study them. I just don't see it, where that would have happened. And then to go to where was the Garden Tomb was quite a little ways away from here. So, at any rate, that's one location, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where they believe that Jesus was crucified. Now, Perry's going to cover the Western Wall, and you've all seen pictures of this, no doubt, on television.
Hey, I want to just say one more thing about the temple. I forgot. It's really complicated who's in control of the Temple Mount. Israelis kind of control it, but they kind of don't. They got it in '67 with the 6-Day War, and part of concessions, they gave control of it back to Jordan, and by control is just administrative control. The Israeli police still keep the security up there, but Jordan gets to tell them what happens up there, like who can attend, who can go up there. That's why you can't, if you're Jewish, you can't pray up there. Well, none of us can, unless you're Muslim. Can't have Bibles, can't have crosses, can't have anything going on up there. So that's, I mean, they control it, but they don't. And I remember just telling CJ, I thought that never worked in America. That just wouldn't work. Okay, but this is the Western Wall. Like I said, it's part of the Herod's expansion, and those rocks down at the very bottom, those were probably there when Jesus was there. I mean, part of it was tore down, and they rebuilt it with the rocks, the blocks that they had. But the very big ones down at the bottom, probably original. This is, I think, the women's side, and it's about half the size of the men's side. So you know, that's not right. In fact, I saw yeah, I saw something on YouTube about that, and he said even though they believe that women are equals now, the men's side is still bigger because that's the tradition, and we're not changing it. So that's just the way it is. But when you approach this, of course, you had to have a hat on if you're a man, and no knees or shoulders visible. You could write down on little pieces of paper, fold them up, stick them in the cracks. Mine didn't hold. It fell right on the floor, but it's illegal to throw them away. They sweep them up at the end of the day. And CJ said that they burn them, but another documentary I saw said that they bury them. So maybe they burn them and then bury them. I don't know how that works. But, and then we saw, while we were there, a bar mitzvah. And you can see the women looking over, and they give a little yell, and it's kind of weird, but you know.
I have that yell on my camera.
Yeah, I've got it on mine too. But you can actually go, I looked this up just yesterday, you can go to westernwall.com and schedule a bar mitzvah, and it'll tell all about it. But that was pretty interesting. And then the teaching, the teaching steps. Now, in Luke 21:37 through 38, it says that Jesus taught at the temple. So this is where rabbis went to teach. Maybe Jesus was there at this time. This would have been the same time because this was all built in 19 BC. So he would have been, this is the way it would have been looking when he was there. But again, it's 36 acres. He could have taught anywhere around it. And Herod made the steps. The steps are really irregular. One's real wide, one's short, so that he wanted you to be mindful when you came up and approached the temple. So you had to be watching what you're doing, not talking, not being social, okay? So you like one step, then 2 steps before you got up to the next one. And reverent as you're approaching. There's all of us sitting at the teaching steps. And there were 50 50 ceremonial baths all around it, so you could make yourself appropriate before you got up to the temple itself. The Jews would. And again, like I said, the Muslims boarded up all the gates. There was 3 gates on that wall going in and 2 gates coming out because more wanted in and less came out at one time. That's about it.
Well, now we'll have Trish. She's going to do day 7.
So day 7, when we were there, was our last day, and as I said on Facebook, last day, best day. This is when we went to the Garden Tomb. As you can see, there was signs in there, and I think you could probably see that everything was holy ground that we were on. But I can tell you personally, this was the minute I walked into the tomb. I just had a complete sense of peace and calm and tranquility that I can't really tell you I felt anywhere else. I think I expected that at the Temple Mount. I even made a comment to Lisa and I think Ashley. I'm like, is it me? Is there something wrong with me? I just don't feel like that. It didn't feel sacred there. Yes, it was holy ground, but I think it's the Muslim control. We talked about stuff. It's just, it was different. It didn't feel right. This felt right. Like this was the whole culmination of the trip coming together. And it was nice to be able to do this on the last day. One of our surgeons had went a couple of years ago and said just scheduling, they ended up going there first and then going to other places. And I don't know that would have felt the same because this was just like the grand finale is what this felt like. So anyway, the Garden Tomb, this was the photo. They have different tour guides. I think they said they volunteer their time to come over, and I can't remember how much time he spends. I believe he was from Australia. Is that correct? Our tour
Yes.
guide that was in the garden.
Wales.
Wales, and was talking about, gave us a little bit of a tour and a lecture ahead of time before we actually went to the tomb. So that right there, I believe, is about 100-year-old photo of Golgotha, which means skull. And this is the area that I'm like Tim, the two places, I feel like this is the place that Jesus was crucified. And you can kind of see the eyes there on it, and then the nose coming down. Now you can't really see that. Some of that rock has broken off and broken away.
Earthquake.
So anyway, this is what it looks like now. You couldn't really see well from the angle, but the picture really did a lot of justice to be able to see that. So that was a really cool experience to get to see that. That's just showing the diagram of the tomb. I was very shocked, I think, about how small it actually was. Like my mind was just blown when I actually saw it. But that was given the diagram. That's actually from where we were standing back there looking actually into the tomb. And we could only go in 6 at a time just due to the size. That gives you an idea of the size of that. And then this side right there, you can see a gate from it. That was where supposedly that Jesus was laid after he was crucified and taken down. And that was like a moment unlike any other for me, just to think it's very possible we were standing in the presence of where our Lord and Savior was actually laid after the sacrifice he made for us. That was, I don't think, like Perry did the meditation Sunday, if people heard that, I don't think there was a dry eye from anybody in our group after we had experienced just being there and being in the presence of that, and then getting to take communion as a group, and then we sang Amazing Grace, and it was just, I can't even begin to tell you what that experience, it just brought it all home for me. But I think the point he also made was that even though we went 13,000 miles round trip, didn't have to do that. It was humbling and it was great, and I would do it again. But Christ lives right here within inside of us. He's with you every day. You can talk to him for anything that you want, and you know that he's living right here within you every single day. Again, I would do it again in a heartbeat. I was a little doubtful on the plane ride over, but I would do it again just because it was such a great experience to be a part of that, and was such a great group of people. So after that, our tour guide took us, we weren't sure we were going to get to go due to, it was their election day over there, and so a lot of things were closed. We weren't sure we were going to go, but he was able, with the Israeli Museum ended up being open, so he was able to take us there. And this is a model of the Israeli Museum that took them 6 years to complete, I believe they said. And this would have been what the Temple Mount would have looked like back then in that replica that they built. And then as we walked around, it just gave a better view from up above in comparison to the size of people and looking at it. But it was, I mean, so detailed. It was just amazing that the amount of time that was put into constructing that to see what the city looked like and just what that area was. And then this right here, up above, that dark wall is a representation of the dark. And then there's another photo of the white dome we were sitting on top of, which was supposed to represent the vassal that the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in. That's what that was called, what they found, and when they heard that break was the vassal. And so that was what the white was on top, and the difference came from the dark into the light. And then we were able to go down into
Yeah, it's just behind.
it.
Yep.
And then it kind of looks like almost like a Hershey's kiss, I think. I have a better explanation. But anyway, we were able to go down inside of that, and we were able to go through, and that's where we were able to see the Dead Sea Scrolls. Of course, we weren't supposed to take any pictures of those just because of the light and stuff, but we were able to get to be a part of that. And that concluded our tour. We got done early that day. I don't think I would have wanted to have done anything else. Just, it was really a time of reflection afterwards, and just kind of everything we had been a part of and gotten to see. Some days were very overwhelming. I know the others said that too. It just felt like so much history and so much information given to us. And just was a lot to process. And I can tell you, just with the others talking this evening, I'm like, I don't know if I heard that. Like, I think I learned something new, and I was there, just because that we received so much information. And I mean, I would like the opportunity to go back and after I've heard it once. I think I could appreciate things even more and see them in a different light a second time to do it. I mean, I said it's a once in a lifetime experience, but I don't really believe that. So anyway, I would do it again. But that concluded our trip on Tuesday. Thank you.
So as you can see, we had 7 very packed days. I think every day our wake up call was like 6 a.m. and we were on the bus by 7:30, 7:45, and sometimes we didn't get back till dark. So we had very full days. Like I said earlier, the trip was more than I didn't know what to expect, but it was more than I expected. We just learned so much. We saw so much. We experienced so much. And to be able to experience that with like-minded faith people just made that much more special. So now we're going to just look at a few quick pictures. We've had people ask us about the food, where we stayed, those kind of things. So we just wanted to just give you an example. So this is at this is the restaurant of St. Peter's Fish. So when we went on the Sea of Galilee, they took us to just a little restaurant, and where we were able to have St. Peter's Fish. So we either had a whole fish or fish fillet. And this is Kathy. That was Kathy. She had a whole fish. So if you can imagine, the fish with the eye looking at you, on your plate. I personally chose the fillet. I didn't want the eye looking at me, and then we had, they brought all different kinds of Israeli salads. Some were very spicy, some were not. So we had options. The French fries were delicious because, if you haven't had good French fries in a day or two, you're craving those. So these are this is the hotel where we stayed in Tiberias. We had buffet dinner every night. And this is some of the pictures of the buffets. We also had buffet breakfast. They had a huge salad bar, so you could pretty much get a salad of all different kinds of things. If you're an adventurous eater, you could try a whole bunch of new things. If you're not an adventurous eater, then you wouldn't starve, which was nice because I'm kind of borderline on adventure eating. So this is honeycomb. So that was a big thing over there. They actually, this frame, it's kind of dark, but it's a frame and it's got the honeycomb in the frame. So you could just go and take your spoon and dig out honeycomb, put it on your plate and eat it with your bread. They always had bread available. So that was just an interesting thing to see. This is another restaurant we went to. This is where we had falafel. And falafel is it's like a hush puppy if you're from the South and you know what a hush puppy is, but it's made with chickpeas. And this particular restaurant was a local family-owned restaurant, and the falafels were delicious. We had falafels and schnitzel, which is a thin chicken dish. And then we had lots of salads if you wanted to, again, have salad to go with your schnitzel and falafel. So we learned some new words while we were there. Again, this is more restaurant or food at the restaurants. Every day for lunch, they took us to a different restaurant. We got to enjoy some lamb and some beef and lots of chicken, which was nice. Lots of fish was available. The last hotel we went to in Jerusalem, it was a kosher kitchen. So if you're not familiar with what kosher means that they don't eat milk, dairy, and meat in the same meal. So like you would never be able to get a cheeseburger. So that was a little different than our first hotel because the first hotel was not kosher. So they served everything all the time. But the second hotel was kosher. So it was interesting just to see the differences in the food that we had available. Like I said, none of us starved. We were fed quite well. Again, we appreciate everybody coming out. It was a trip of a lifetime. I'm like Trish, I said I'll do it once and probably never go back, but would love to go back just to be able to see everything again, knowing what I know now. We talked, in our in the afternoons when we would be back at the hotel just waiting on dinner or just sitting in the lobby and visiting about how, what's our next trip? What do we want to do next? Some of us would love to go do the footsteps of Paul in Greece and Turkey. So, there's lots of things out there. I would just say from my personal experience, if this is ever something on your bucket list and you can do it, you should do it, because I think that all of us are glad we went. I don't think we would ever say we didn't really enjoy the trip. It was just something that we all would say we were glad to do. And thankfully, 90 to 95% of what we were able to do in Jerusalem and in Israel, Travis, who has some mobility issues, he was able to do with us. So we were very thankful for that. These are just some things that really stuck out to me. You have Jesus in your heart, but do you really have your eyes open to see him in the people around you? Sometimes we don't see Jesus in somebody. And I got to see that in a lot of people on this trip. I saw Terry make sure that when we were in the Jordan River that he got a cup of water and he brought it to Travis. He said, "You've been in the Jordan River." That's special. As a parent, that's very special. We saw David Jameson. He was so attentive to Travis. And, for a younger person to help to do that, I saw Jesus there. So, it's things like that that I think we take for granted and we don't necessarily open our eyes to see. So for that, I'm thankful for the trip. Now we're going to open it up for questions. So does anybody have a specific question before we adjourn? And don't be shy. Yes, ma'am.
I was in Mexico, okay? Went to the Mayan ruins. They wouldn't let you near any of these because they said if you touched it, it ruined the stone and blah, 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 too many people. How do you continue to have this many tourists and like going into the tomb and not destroy that area?
I'm going to say,
I think one of the things that, like you're talking about, when she was talking about the bath, the mitzvahs, these tiles, about how old they were. And I looked at them and I said, if this was in the United States, it would have a big thing around it and you wouldn't get close to it. Honest to goodness, I just think it's a God-preserved thing. I mean, it's so important to all of us, but
Ashley? Oh, she was asking. Oh, sorry. She was just asking how was the tomb? How were these things preserved all these years, thousands of years, and people going in? One thing I noticed in the garden tomb area specifically, they asked you not to take any rocks or anything from the area for that very reason. They wanted to try to preserve everything. I didn't, the rocks. The tomb was like a cave that they had dug out the rock, but I didn't see any loose rock there. So I don't know if it's because of the type of rock. He said granite maybe, so I'm not really sure. Right. There were some areas that we couldn't get, like in the tomb, you couldn't get to like the area where Jesus laid, where they think Jesus laid. There were gates around it, but you could see it. So there were other places that, they had pebbles, like at Bet Shean, there were rocks and different things that you could pick up and put in your pocket. And I'll be honest, I brought rocks home in my suitcase. I thought of
Caesarea or Caesarea. I mean, it was almost like a park because around the palace, in the pool that Tim was talking about, there were people out there swimming and had their gear on and snorkeling and all that kind of stuff. That just it was like a park or something here. They didn't think anything about it.
I never really thought about that before. I guess I didn't think about your question, but you're right. People were all over everything, and we walked and touched a lot of things, and it is amazing the limestone that they use to build everything. It has been there for ages, and it's still there. I mean, I'm sure stuff gets smoothed off a little bit, but that's a good question. It may be like Gail said, you know, it's just a God thing.
Okay, anybody else have any questions? Okay, I'm going to turn it to Tim to close out.
Well, we do appreciate the opportunity to go to the trip. On a personal level, I know this was something that the elders put together with Jana, and pretty much said all those months ago, when Mark said, "You've taught us all these years. You need to go see it." It was an education. I mean, I've studied this stuff for years. I've, books and books and books and, all the different kinds of videos and things you see, but it's nothing like being there and just feeling the experience of walking where Jesus walked with the apostles, and just all those different things that we saw. I'll never forget it. The images are just kind of just ingrained in my head right now of all the different, you mentioned today, I automatically go right back to wherever we were that day and see the things that were going on there. And then I try to imagine like Jesus in Capernaum teaching in the synagogue. And, I went and stood in an area where this is likely where he stood, because in the synagogue structure, how the man would stand towards the front, you stand here and think, this is Capernaum, this is the synagogue, this is where he taught. My goodness, you just get a feeling that's just incredible that comes over you, I just thought the whole experience was totally amazing. And on a personal level, thank you so much for your generosity to send me. Some of you even did above and beyond what the church did, and I appreciate you individuals who helped out for me to go on this trip, and I will remember it the rest of my life. Would I go back? I would go back, but I'm kind of like John. I would like to maybe take in his footsteps of Paul, and to go to Athens, and to go to Corinth and Ephesus and Philippi and those places like that. I would like to do that sometime, but this is something I'll just live with for a long time. It's just one of those. I didn't even have it on a bucket list, because I just thought I'll never go. But you all made it possible, so I'm very grateful for that.
Travis had his accident when he was 19, and so we never had an empty nest. And this was something that was on a bucket list from long before. I have to say, it was the people at this church that even encouraged us about going, because we did not think it was a possibility. We've never been out of the United States before, except BC before children. We came back to Canada once, and that's, we just haven't. We haven't ever been able to travel. And don't put off things too long. Terry will turn 80 in March. I'll be 76, and it was kind of a struggle, and it was a challenge, but it was so worth it. And Ashley was like an angel that just kind of followed everybody around to make sure nobody got left behind. But it was through the encouragement of the people in our small group that said, "Yes, you can. We understand his needs. We can, we can do it." And if our grandson David had not gone, we could not have gone. And they even gave up a room situation so that we could be in a room beside theirs to make that easier for us. So we felt and experienced God's love all the way through it. And I came back and I said, I can die happy. I mean, it's just, it doesn't get any better than that. So I thank this church. We haven't been members here for a long, long time, like many of you have, but don't put off those special things. It's really worth it. Just take the leap of faith and go.
Yeah, that's all true. And Ashley was always the one bringing up the rear counting heads, making sure, giving the signal to our CJ, our guy that was leading us, that we're all present and everything like that. Matter of fact, I'm sure when I looked into the church at Gethsemane and I saw that service going on, and I saw that little hen with the little chicks behind, I'm sure I saw the inscription of your face on that hen's head right there, But she was making sure we were always together, so. But yeah, tell you what, but to go with this group of people, any of you would have been great to go with, but this group of people we just melded so well together, and lots of fabulous discussions that we had on the bus, and just in between places and everything. So it was such a worthy trip, and we all thank you very much for the opportunity. So if there's nothing else tonight, we'll close with a word of prayer, and we'll let you go. Okay? All right. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for this evening, for an opportunity we had to share some pictures. And the pictures that we showed here is just a fraction of what were taken. Father, we know literally thousands of pictures were taken on this trip, but we tried to show something that was very representative of each day. But there was so much more that we could not show tonight, but we have them. We have those pictures. We have those images that people can look at, and even some of the video things that we did. Father, it was just a tremendous blessing to be a part of all this. And we thank you, Father, for sending your Son, Jesus Christ. He makes it all possible. We felt his presence very strongly there, even as we can feel it here when we're just worshiping as we do each and every week. But it was extra special there, and we thank you for that. I'm thankful for all the history of the Bible, where we can see those sites that took in people like Abraham or Elijah or David. Any of those, we saw places where they were, and the things that come to our mind from the stories of the scriptures. It's just good to know that there's so much authentication to what the Bible has to say. And we thank you, though, that first of all, we can accept what your Bible has to say just on faith, but then to see other things that support it so well. We know that all the Bible's true. We know that everything that's happened did happen the way the Bible said it. We also know, Father, that what is yet to happen is exciting too. We don't know exactly when Jesus is coming back, but we know he's coming back. And all of us really will have a front row seat to that one way or the other. And we look forward to that day when we're all called home. But until that time, Father, we thank you for the experiences we can have on this earth that just help to make our faith that much stronger. Thank you for this congregation, for their love, their support, and all the things they constantly do to help build your kingdom. Bless their lives for that. Father, we pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks for coming. Good night.